let's continue the conversation now with Marc Short, former chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence. Marc, thank you so much for being with us. Mr. Pence heading to Iowa tomorrow. He was just in New Hampshire. Do you think he's going to officially throw his hat in the ring for a 2024 campaign?
Good morning, Adrienne. Thanks for having me on. I think that the vice president's family continue to pray for this decision, looking for discernment as to where they can serve America best in their next chapter of life. And I think he continues to get encouraged by the reception he gets. The meeting last night you talk about was a sold-out dinner in New Hampshire. He has great crowds anticipated tomorrow in Iowa. And so I think he's continuing to get a lot of encouragement from the American people. But I think that a decision on that front is probably coming in the next few weeks.
Okay. Well, that's something that we haven't heard. Thank you. A new Quinnipiac University poll of GOP voters, we have to get to these numbers, says that former President Trump has 46% support right now. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has 32%. Nikki Haley has 5%. And former Vice President Pence at just 3%. Do you think that it hurt him to speak critically of his former boss?
Oh, I think that Americans know that Vice President Pence stood next to Donald Trump in advancing so many great policy victories for the American people, from what we did to secure the border, to address the threat that China poses, to tax relief. And I think they know his record, as well as supporting so many great judicial nominations. But at the same time, the events of January 6th were extraordinary, and I think a very tragic day for the American people. And I think the American people look for leaders who are going to stand up and defend the Constitution as they swear an oath to do. And I think that those who fail to do so, in some ways, to disqualify an act about future political service and public service to the American people. And I think Vice President Pence knew what the threats and what the concerns were from so many of those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, but he knew what his oath was and his responsibility was to the American people and the Constitution, and that's what he upheld. And so I think the American people look for that kind of leadership, honestly, Adrienne. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, the polls at this point, let's keep in mind, in the 2012 cycle, Michelle Bachmann won the Iowa straw poll in August of 2011. At this point in 2016, Donald Trump was low in the polls, and everybody was saying that Scott Walker is going to be the next Republican nominee. And even in 2020, the reality is that Bernie Sanders had a significant lead at this point. And then you had a whole sort of attention focus on Kamala Harris before Joe Biden began to emerge. And so everyone in D.C. wants to be a pundit and say who can win and who can't. The great thing about this is actually the voters get to decide, and they'll get to know the candidates more in the coming months when they're actually in the states and the debates begin.
But do you think that voters already know Mr. Pence? I mean, obviously known for working with Mr. Trump, but he's known for being measured, more mild-mannered, a more mild-mannered member of the Republican Party, especially when compared to DeSantis and the former president. But in terms of his separation or his way of setting himself apart from, say, Nikki Haley, what do you think he can do moving forward to distinguish himself?
Oh, I think it's just simply reintroducing himself to the American people. I think that Republican voters love the fact that Mike Pence was one of the few who stood up in Congress actually during the Republican years when George Bush was president and stood up and opposed the big spending of Republicans, whether or not it was opposing a federal takeover of the Department of Education and No Child Left Behind, or standing in the well of Congress being the first to oppose the Wall Street bailouts, being one who opposed cash for clunkers. And so many of these bills were big spending Republican bills. And I think a lot of Americans know him as the loyal lieutenant to Donald Trump when he was vice president. They'll get a chance to get to know him better in the coming weeks when he actually is able to talk more about, these are my viewpoints. This is what I think the direction for America is, as you've heard him do about the threat that's posed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or you've heard him take on the challenge of where our spending crisis is, where we actually have a debt to GDP ratio that's over 100% for the first time since World War II. And we're passing on an unburdenable crisis to our children and grandchildren that there's no good options for if we don't begin to address now. And he's not going to stick his head in the sand and say, oh, that's for future generations to deal with. He's going to be offering real solutions to the American people. And I think that's what voters are wanting to see.
Well, it certainly is something that I know, as you said, he said it multiple times, he will be praying about in terms of running for that candidacy. Marc Short, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.